Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linnell Ladd. I'm with Kansas State University's Pollution Prevention Institute. Today, my talk is on environmental impact of food waste prevention education. So once again, thanks for joining me. See if I can get there we go. Quick start. Who are we at K-State PPI? Pollution Prevention Institute is part of the Carl R. Ice College of Engineering Extension. And we are 100% grant funded. We get no funding from the College of Engineering, but we are in an off-campus office. And we provide environmental, technical, and regulatory assistance to industry, institutions, communities, and government. And the reason I'm speaking to you today is because we have two grant-funded projects that one is from EPA's Environmental Education Program, and one grant is from EPA's Solid Material Management. And the EE grant, we're working with Southeast Kansas communities and schools and universities on food waste and food waste prevention. And the Solid Material Management grant we just received this month or last month in October. Gosh, time flies. And we'll be working with Johnson County Environmental Department and K through 12 schools and industries up here in Northeast Kansas. By the way, I'm in Topeka, not in Manhattan today. So, all right. So why am I talking to you about reducing food waste when it comes to environmental education? I don't know if any of you are familiar with Project Drawdown or the book Drawdown and the comprehensive list in that book about the strategies to reduce greenhouse gases and mitigate climate change. And food waste prevention is the number 3 top way to reduce our greenhouse gases globally and to help mitigate climate change. So globally, their studies showed that food waste contributes 70.53 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. Now, hopefully we're all scientists, right? Or we're all in environmental education. So I'm hoping everybody knows what CO2 equivalent is. I put some definitions here. We're talking about carbon dioxide equivalents. And so when we're talking about CO2, it is the basis for global warming potential. It has a global warming potential of 1. And we have 3 main gases and then groups of different fluorinated carbons and fluorinated gases that make up numerous chemicals that are considered to be greenhouse gases. But CO2 has a global warming potential of 1. Methane has a global warming potential of 28, and sulfur hexafluoride, SF6, has a global warming potential of 23,500. So what we're saying here is it has the potential 23,500 times greater than CO2 to trap greenhouse and cause greenhouse effect. Now, greenhouse effect is good, right? And as I often tell people, because we still live in a world where there's questions about climate change and the science of climate change, and there's some folks that still have doubt. One of the things that I like to tell people is, there's good things about CO2 and there's good things about greenhouse gases. If we did not have the greenhouse gas effect, we'd live on a cold planet, right? But too much of a good thing sometimes is bad. And as scientists, we know that. We know that, you could drink too much water and it would be bad for you, right? Too much oxygen is bad for you. Too much CO2 in our atmosphere is bad. It's not good. So as we increase that percentage. And that's why we are working on these projects, because it's very important. As we all know, we have world leaders meeting this week about climate change, and the outlook is not good. So I want to define a couple of things for you. A lot of times you'll hear the term food waste, and I get a little picky about terminology. Food waste versus wasted food. And am I too picky? Well, maybe a little bit, but food waste to me is any food that's inherently waste-like. It's not edible anymore. Animals nor people could eat it. It's spoiled, it's contaminated, it's mixed in with other wastes, like you might see in the lunchroom when students scrape off their plates. They may have napkins in there, may have plastic forks or things like that, or metal forks even. I've seen those in the trash at schools. And any food waste is a management issue, and disposal of some kind is going to be required. But wasted food, now when I say wasted food, I'm talking about food that is still viable. It could still be used for its purpose. It could be fed to animals. It could be donated. It could be eaten by us. And disposal is a result of people not having other options, or not understanding that they had other options to donate or compost or do something differently, or donate to animal feed and do something differently with the wasted food. So, we just started hearing about this, right? I mean, it seems like we just started hearing about food waste and the problem with food waste and the impact to the environment just in the recent years. But it's not a new problem. Food has been wasted forever. And these are posters. Now, of course, the first one I wouldn't recommend you use in a school, elementary or high school or any place. College, maybe it would be okay in history or when you're studying things like that. But these are from World War I. So we're talking 1914 to 1918, during the World War I era. And food was critical. And the poster on the right about food, buying it with thought, cooking it with care, using less wheat and meat, buying local foods, serve just enough, use what is left. These are all concepts that we're trying to apply today, that we're trying to spread the message. And it just seems amazing to me that this was around in 1914, this concept of conserving food and food having a value. Because yes, food is a natural resource. It's a natural resource, just like our natural gas or our fossil fuels are considered natural resources, or our forests and our prairies are natural resources, because there's a lot of natural resource that goes into growing our food. And I just have some examples here that I think students really would be surprised. Now, I just focused on water in this slide, but students, especially when you get into the upper elementary and middle school, would probably be really interested about how much water it takes to create certain food products. So 1 pound of bread loaf is 200 gallons. I find this interesting because a lot of people are moving away from regular milk, because it's an animal product, and they're moving towards almond milks or coconut milks. And if you look at the numbers here, yes, it takes a lot of water to make a gallon of milk. But look how much water it takes to make a gallon of almond milk, almost the same. I mean, very, very close. So, even though reducing our reliance on animal products is good for the environment, we also have situations where, the alternative may not be that much better when we're looking at resource conservation. And this is just some numbers from 2017. These numbers fluctuate, and it actually depends on what source you use. There's plenty of information out there, plenty of different organizations with information. But food and agriculture here in the U.S. Consumes about 16% of all the energy produced. 50% of the land here in the United States is used for agricultural purposes. And 67% of all the fresh water is used for agriculture here in the United States. Yet, here it says 40%. There are some studies that say it's 35% of the total food. You'll see that number a little later with something else I share. 40% of our food goes uneaten, and this is from farm to fork. Okay. And so things get wasted out in the field, and that could be for a number of reasons. The most ridiculous is like, oh, that bean that, I'm selling my crop to a certain company to be canned, and these beans don't meet spec. They're not long enough. They're not perfect. They're ugly beans. So I'm just going to go dump them out in the back 40. And there was actually an organization, I think they were in Kentucky, that they noticed this trend, and they worked with a local farmer to set up an extended processing part of the plant where the beans came in to the facility, and the farmer got what he needed to sell to the market that was desirable. The rest of the beans were taken and then sorted separately and then packaged and taken to a food bank to be used and distributed to people in need. So we have these concerns, and it's all circular for the most part. And there's a lot of players, policy, government, educators like us, and funders and lenders like EPA and other organizations that lend money to farmers and to growers, and trade associations. So we have a lot of players in this. Some of you may have already seen this. This has been out for a while, but it's kind of a stark image of the amount of food that a family of 4 wastes in 1 month. So my project work is really focusing on feeding people or animals and not landfills. Whenever the food is still edible and safe for people or animals to eat, we need to be directing that food for its intended purpose and not sending it to landfills. Here in Kansas, this was in 2016. They haven't done a more recent update, but in 2016, KDHE did a survey of all the landfills here in Kansas, and they identified that approximately 17% of the waste coming into all of our landfills here in Kansas is food waste, and there's another 7% that's yard waste. So almost a quarter of the waste going into our Kansas landfills is organic waste that could be used for other purposes. It could be energy recovery. It could be composted. There are things that we could be using this material for instead of just putting it in a landfill. I really like this picture, but I added my own arrows because I just felt like, this was a study done out of the Netherlands, and they had this wonderful image of the life cycle of food. And the things to think about, and that I added in here, I added in this water, energy, and fossil fuels. That's what they're talking about here, because we're still using a great amount of fossil fuels, and those fossil fuels are used to make some of the chemicals that we utilize when we are growing our food. So, if we have herbicides and pesticides that are being used, those are petroleum-based for the most part. They are, a chemical, and they are processed and manufactured. So we have a lot of energy going into this whole beginning to help grow our food. And along with that, we have GHGs and other air pollutants and other wastes coming from processing facilities that are, chemical processing, refining. Then we have inputs that are going into the farming, which are the water, the energy, the chemicals, the tractor using fossil fuels. And then, if we have the food, once it comes out, if it's going into a manufacturing process, because a lot of our food nowadays is prepared food, right? So we have a great number of food manufacturers here in the United States, whether you're thinking of, meat packing, or if you're thinking about cereals and breads. I urge you, if you haven't done this, if you haven't thought about doing this, just go into the grocery store next time you're there and walk down the cereal aisle. And I don't know if you've really thought about it while you've been on the cereal aisle, but it's something I think even something you could have kids do, just to think about them, the number of boxes of cereal and the different kinds of cereal and the different chocolate and everything. I mean, you think about it. We've got all these flavors and brands, and it's all manufactured, which creates other pollution. It creates greenhouse gases. But do we really need all that? I know we all love variety, but do we really need all of that? You could go to the bread aisle, and some of the most largest waste in grocery stores comes from the deli and their bakery areas because they overproduce a lot of times, and then that bread goes stale before it gets purchased. So it's just something to think about. I mean, we love the idea. I know during COVID, we walked into stores, right? And we saw empty shelves. And we love the idea of knowing that our stuff that we want is there. But next time, just kind of think about, how much we have sometimes on the shelves that did we really need that? And is that, overproduction is one of the things that is the cause of food waste. We're overproducing food. It's not being eaten, and it's going to waste. So I'm going to stop preaching now and move to the next part. Anyway, you can see as we go through this, we're at distribution, we're at retail, and preparation. All the way along here, we are getting waste from every action. There, food gets spoiled here. It gets spoiled at the, before it gets to the distribution, it gets spoiled. Their trucks wreck and food has to be thrown out before it gets to retail. We have a lot of things that impact how food ends up being wasted. And so we can have it, maybe deteriorating in the field because we had a hailstorm, and that could be like a natural event where the crop is just left out in the field to deteriorate the food that's ending up in the landfill that we don't want there. Energy recovery. A lot of people think about how the landfills now are collecting the gas, and they're using that gas for electrical generation, but that's not energy recovery because remember, the food went to the landfill and we didn't want it there. Energy recovery would be more like an anaerobic digestion or something to that effect. And then there's recycling, and recycling includes composting. So there is a social impact to our wasted food. And I don't have to tell any of you that are working in public schools or private schools that, we have a food insecurity problem here in the United States. We're in the breadbasket, right? This is the breadbasket. Somebody told me that, where the cows are grown and the wheat is grown and the corn and everything. But why are 1 in 6 children in Kansas food insecure? Why are 1 in 7 in Missouri food insecure? These are 2019 numbers from Feeding America. And I can assure you that number is a lot higher and was extremely higher during COVID, especially the shutdown period, the lockdown period. And I'm not sure that we've gotten back and gotten back to normal. This shouldn't be normal, though, in my opinion. So what is food security? It's defined as a lack of consistent access to enough food to live an active, healthy life. So we're talking about, not knowing where your next meal is coming from. You may have a meal, but you may not know when your next one is going to be coming. So we're talking about students maybe that have lunch at school, breakfast and lunch at school, but maybe they don't have dinner when they go home, and that would be they would be food insecure. This isn't starvation necessarily, but we recognize when there's not enough funding at home or in the household to provide adequate meals, that's considered food insecure. So this is just some snapshots of, Kansas, and I'll show you one of Missouri. This again is 2019 data. Overall in Kansas, the food insecurity rate is 12.1%. This includes adults and children. And 41% of the population is below SNAP threshold of 130% poverty. That's a large percentage of Kansans. And the highest food insecurity rates are in Southeast Kansas, and that's why I'm doing my environmental education project in Southeast Kansas. Woodson County in 2019 had a food insecurity rate of 16.7%. And that's, Southeast Kansas, I lived there for many years, and that's the heart of a lot of agriculture here in Kansas. It's not just out in Western Kansas. And, that just shocks me that in Southeast Kansas, the insecurity rates are the highest. And you can see this is the coloring. This is Southeast Kansas. All these counties are anywhere from 14 to 16%. And we have one up in Northwest, Northwest Kansas. That's fairly high. Here's Missouri's data. The overall insecurity rate in 2019 was 13.2, so a little higher than in Kansas. And 46% of the population are below SNAP threshold of 130% poverty level. And the highest food insecurity rates are in Ozark County, or they were at that time at 21.8% of the population face food insecurity. So ReFed is an organization that looks into and does research into food waste and solutions to prevent food waste. And I'm going to show you the Insights engine, ReFed's Insights engine. It's pretty cool. I think you'll like it. But it covers 2010 to 2019 data, and I think they plan to update it, as frequently as they can. It contains national and state data on surplus food, food waste, metric tons of CO2 equivalent, gallons of water that's been used in the in the processing of the food, and how many meals this all gets calculated to. If we would save the food instead of it being food waste, how many meals for people would that be equivalent? They have a solutions database that covers optimizing harvest, enhancing product distribution, refining product management, maximizing product utilization, reshaping consumer environments, strengthening food rescue, and recycling anything remaining. So there's all these solutions that you can look at. I think this tool is handy for a lot of reasons. I think it can be used in a lot of different aspects in the classroom. I think if you were talking about consumer sciences and social sciences, you could utilize this of, what are consumers interested? What helps consumers when they buy something helps them better utilize that product? And you could utilize this to show some solutions that way. Same with the environmental studies in math, so there's data in here, things are being calculated. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and I'll show you this Insights engine and some of the data. I think you'll really like this tool. Hopefully everyone's seen this at least once. This is EPA's food recovery hierarchy. And so as we go down, we go from most preferred to least preferred. And when we're talking about source reduction, we're talking about, like reducing production. So instead of overproducing lunches or meals, just making just enough to cover, how many students you're going to have at lunch. And then when you can't exactly get that right, because that's hard, I know, then have plans to donate that food to your local food bank so that you can feed hungry people. And then if it's food that maybe you're a little concerned that it's been out on the buffet a little too long, but it would still be edible to animals, find a way to divert it to there. And then again, the industrial uses we talked about was anaerobic digestion is really becoming a popular concept. We already have anaerobic digesters or city municipal water treatment plants that have anaerobic digesters that could be converted to capturing the gases, the methane that would come off of the process of anaerobic digestion. And Dodge City does it. They capture their methane off of their anaerobic digestion system at their municipal waste treatment. And they are putting their methane in a pipeline And last I knew, it goes in a pipeline to Houston, and then it's tanked and put on a ship to the Netherlands. Now that seems crazy, but I mean, it could be used locally. But it's a replacement for the fossil fuel methane. So that's an example of industrial use. Composting, you see that it's close to landfilling. And why is that? Composting does create greenhouse gases. So it's not up higher than industrial use because you get that energy recovery with industrial use. But it is, it's a better method than landfilling. And then, of course, landfilling. And I had these little questions. I didn't make a poll, but it's just something to think about. When you're thinking about source reduction, where can source reduction be best applied at your school or in your restaurant or in your home? What are the real or perceived barriers to feeding hungry people and animals? We're going to talk about that just briefly here in a second. Then we have the industrial use. A lot of times it's the availability of the technology, and sometimes the barrier is cost. There's that implementation cost, that capital expenditure to buy the equipment to do this. And composting, like I said, is, has the GHG issue with it. It produces just a little bit of GHG as food is composting. And then, of course, landfilling is our last resort. We don't want to do it, but it's the easiest choice because it's less hassle for a lot of people, they feel like. And number two, it is still very, very cheap to landfill materials, especially here in Kansas. I haven't checked the tipping fees and the landfill fees in Missouri, but here in Kansas, it's still very cheap to dispose of things. And a lot of landfills, you can just take your pickup truck if you need to, or if you want to dump things off. So that's why it hasn't been prohibited yet, cost-wise, for people to step back and say, well, I can recycle this, I can recycle my plastics and my glass and stuff, and I can, keep my food waste out of the land, out of my dumpster and compost it. And that's what I do here at home. Luckily, Topeka has both a recycling program and I compost in my backyard here in Topeka. I don't have a space for a garden or anything. I do patio pot, like tomatoes and things, but I still use my composting for my flower beds and things like that. So it can be done. It can be done at a school level, and an example of composting at a university. K-State is doing composting. Johnson County is doing composting. They actually have a big machine that speeds up the process. And they use it in their ag studies. So donation and food waste, state policies and provisions. We have some information in ReFed, and I hope that I'm able to get this to you, these slides to you in a version that you can click the links. And also there's, policy finders for what's here in Kansas. So it covers topics like food date labeling, donations and tax incentives, animal feed requirements, because recently the U.S. Department of Agriculture changed some of the requirements for human food that's going to be converted to animal feed. There's some strict requirements, but there are some companies around the area that will take food waste, and they know how to legally and appropriately handle the food so that it can be converted to animal feed. And then organic waste bans, like I said, is still too cheap in Kansas. And so we don't have an organic waste ban that some states do back east and out west, have bans on food waste to the landfill. And then other states have recycling policies. Here in Kansas, if you have want to do composting and it's going to be large, and there's a certain size restriction. Under a certain size on composting, you don't need a permit from a KDHE, but if you get above a certain size and amounts of food waste or organic waste that you're going to be composting, you need to get a permit. So those are things to be aware of. But donation always worries a lot of people because, they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble if they donate the food, if, there could be liability. I hear that a lot when I work, especially with, large corporations, or when I work with restaurants on food waste. They're concerned about liability. But there is a federal law, it's the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, and it protects donors from civil liability as long as they are, in good faith donating food that they have deemed to be still viable for and edible for people and won't make people sick. So on this website is the actual policy for Kansas, but I was unable to find a policy for Missouri. So you would have to look at Missouri specific laws and see if there's anything in Missouri law that's a little different or would supersede the Emerson Good Samaritan Act federal law. I don't know that that's possible, but there could be some things that would supersede it. So you have to look into that. And I help people look into those things, but we're only working in Kansas, but you can call me if you have questions. I'd be glad to help. On our website, we've developed some guidance documents for schools and universities on managing food waste and best practices. So those are available now, but I'm extending our work under this EE grant to develop even better best practices and plan to have a playbook. And I have 5 sub-awardees, and on top of that, there's a number of people that I'm hoping will be part of the contribution to that playbook, so that we can get some best policies of things and case studies that we're seeing in Kansas that are best practices, so other people can replicate it. And we do have some tools so that you can track and do food waste tracking. And this is they're simple little spreadsheets where you can enter in the amounts, you weigh your food waste, and enter the amounts, and you can you can calculate how much money is being wasted, going to the trash, and then how much you would save if you prevented that from happening, if you did source reduction or reduced overproduction. So we are wanting to work with Kansas schools coming up here after the first of the year and help you identify, your food waste amounts, and, provide you with some guidance and, help you develop some campaigns in your schools to help reduce food waste if you're interested. And I'll have more on that here in a minute. And then we also are building a map that's going to have, you can click on the counties and find out where you can donate food. Shawnee County has done really great. They have compiled something, the county themselves, the county health department put together all of the places that you can, all the food banks and kitchens and things like that where you can donate food, but not every county has that. So we're trying to fill this in. And it's a lot of work because you have to Google all these things and then put all this in to our database. And then, back to the Public Health Law Center, they also have some guidance for food in schools that I think is pretty interesting since, there's a lot of regulations about food, especially in K through 12 and schools, and how you guys have to offer, what you have to offer, on, restrictions on what can be on share tables and those kind of things. So it's really good to kind of get a legal perspective sometimes. And this is a good resource for schools, I believe, the Public Health Law Center. USDA and EPA, of course, have a lot of information about food waste and food waste prevention. So I gave some resources here. Again, I hope to, make this available in a format that you guys will be able to utilize these links after this presentation today and after the conference. All right, let's look at the Insights engine. I just provided a quick little picture here because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to transfer back and forth. But with 8 minutes left, I want to take a little time to show you the ReFed Insights engine. And this is just an overview. It said in 2019 in Kansas, there was 116,000 tons of food waste. They report for the food and generated in food service, so that would include colleges and schools and restaurants. 100% of it's going to the landfill, according to ReFed here in Kansas, from these sources, from this industry type. And 90.7% of that is prepared foods, and 6.3% of this 116,000 is coming from K through 12 schools. And 2.1 is coming from colleges and universities. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a second, and I'm going to share the Insights engine from ReFed. So let's take a look at that. So hopefully I stopped sharing, and now I'm getting back to where I can share. All right. It looks like I'm sharing the screen over here. This Insight engine is so interesting because we have like a kind of an information page about, how to use the tool, how to explore solutions and calculate impact. But I just wanted to kind of show an overview. So this first thing we're looking at is this is the entire United States information for 2019, which says 35% of total production. This is in surplus food. So this is how much food is actually surplus that could be used. It could have been served. It could have been eaten. And that's 35% of total production. So of all the food that's being produced, 8.6 million of it is surplus. Okay. So let's dig down into this. I'm just going to start with Kansas because I think it's just really interesting how you can use this tool to look at it in multiple different ways. So first you have kind of a decision up here. Do you want to look at the surplus food in tons, how much extra food is produced annually here in the whole United States? Or do you want to look at dollars, food waste tons, metric tons of CO2 equivalent, gallons of water, or meals? Well, let's look at food waste tons. So next decision, you can look at all sectors or all food industry type sectors, or you can come in here and choose. You can choose from farm, produce only, food service, manufacturing, residential, or retail. Let's use food service because that's in our area. We have food service at our schools. So 10.8 million food waste tons were generated in food service across all of the United States in 2019. And it looks like 1.15 tons of it, or 10.7%, was incinerated. I didn't know that. That's kind of interesting. And the other 89.3% was landfill. Now we could go here. This is destinations. This is where that food waste ends up. Now we could look at what the food is. What types of food is it? Well, it's mostly the prepared foods, right, and food service, 91.1%. Some of it is dry goods. Some of it's fresh meat and seafood at 1.7%. Dairy and eggs, 1.6%, which I know that milk is what I hear gets thrown away a lot at schools. And I've seen it. I mean, the students either just don't drink it and they throw it straight in the trash unopened, or they open it, take a couple of drinks, and then throw it away. So that's probably part of that. And then produce, ready-to-drink beverages, and breads and frozen items. And then if we look at the subsectors, who are the biggest contributors to this? So we have full service restaurants are the biggest contributors to this tonnage up here. Then we have limited service restaurants, healthcare, lodging, and here's our K through 12 at 4.7%. Recreation, caterers, refreshment services, business and industry, colleges and universities, and transportation and military. I'm not surprised the military's low because I think those drill sergeants make everybody clean their plate. My son's in the military and that's what he's told me, so I don't know. Anyway, very interesting information. Now, we could look, we can do this and we can jump to, let's go to Missouri. So I've been talking a lot about Kansas, right? Let's look at Missouri. So, the numbers are pretty close still, pretty similar to what we saw before. 4.6 in education, 2.1 in colleges and universities. The next thing you can look at, when you are looking at these numbers, you also have a solutions database that's really interesting. Excuse me. So you can look at different, the impact metrics. So you can look at dollars, tons, climate, water, meals, jobs. How many jobs do certain solutions create if you implement them? And, we're thinking about jobs a lot nowadays, right? And, green infrastructure, green activities, green building, these create jobs. These create a lot of really good jobs for people. So it's something to think about as you're looking through this. And again, your stakeholders, this could be your consumers, your food service, government, manufacturers, and solution providers. You can choose any of these. Let's choose food service again. Let's look at tons again because we're kind of looking at that. So really, we look at all food types. We'll leave it at that. And let's go with Missouri again, just to kind of choose a state.
Now we have about 1 minute left.
All right.
Okay. So sorry.
So no, it's all right. I'm gonna stop sharing this. And I'm sure if anybody has any questions about the Insight Engine, they're going to be able to come and find me and talk to me. And we also have tools from EPA. And one of the things that if anybody needs some help with campaigns, we helped KU. Yes, we helped KU with a campaign. And we worked with several KU students to put a campaign together for their dining halls. And one of the things that we really focused in on was making it relevant to their campus. And we had some numbers from their food waste audits. So we knew what they were wasting. And we're trying to encourage, in the dining halls, don't take more than you can eat. Similarly with elementary. And it looks like I'm almost done, but that's it, I think, right?
Right.
If anybody wants to contact me, here's my information. We're looking for schools to work with us.
Thank you so much for that. And I think you hit on, there were some questions that were in the chat, and I believe you hit on those. And this session has been recorded, so you all can feel free to go back and review it at your leisure. So Thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you for having me.
All righty.
Bye-bye.